I'd like to welcome everybody to the Public Safety Committee meeting for February 11th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
I would like to, before we do that, let me back up, add a discussion on the mutual aid agreements for Shackle Island and number 1 volunteer fire department. So with that, may I get another motion to accept the agenda?
Yes, with that change. And who seconds?
I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We don't have anyone signed up for public comments. We don't have any. We have a resolution to discuss. Would you like to start the discussion, or would you like me to?
Sure. So Steve Frost, who's been involved in Shackle Island Volunteer Fire Department for a long time, he contacted Chief Bush about helping out and seeing if he could meet with the board there and figure out a way that the city and the volunteer fire department could work together. Steve's a good guy. Like I said, he's been involved in it for many, many years and had a business in Hendersonville for a long time. And so he reached out to, he and Chief Bush talked actually last week and then followed up a couple times since then. And he let us know that they had a board meeting last night and agreed that they could sign the agreement similar to what Goodlettsville had. And so we looked at that and realized that the board had set an expiration date for them to do that. And that was November 30th of 2023. Y'all correct me if I'm saying something wrong.
Did you say Goodlettsville? Like Goodlettsville?
Oh, I did say like number 1.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And so I feel like I need to come back to the board. And since y'all were meeting tonight and the board was voting tonight, and since there is some urgency here, I felt like we should bring it forward now.
And has our attorney looked at these agreements?
He wrote them.
You read it? Okay. Is our insurance carrier, are they okay with this? Do you know? They're good. Okay. So this would cover us.
So, and let me say something, a little bit about something about that, is that the reason that we initially felt like we needed something in writing, even though we had been working with the volunteers for several years, the reason we felt like we needed to do that is because we were contacted by an insurance carrier. They wanted a written agreement. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. Since then, the State General Assembly has changed their laws that we no longer need one. However, we need things spelled out as far as what our responsibilities are, what type calls we answer, and what the what the chain of command is when we do that. So even if this is just important to have, regardless of insurance pushing us into it.
But at that meeting, at the time before the law changed, we were required. I was in that meeting.
Yep.
I have a couple of questions on it after looking at it. Chief Bush, are you comfortable sending your firefighters and our equipment to go aid in these? Are you comfortable
Yes,
with the agreement? And
yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
With the understanding, in the mutual aid law, the way it is currently written, if there is a need in the city limits of Hendersonville and a request comes from anybody, not just Shackle Island, Goodlettsville, Gallatin, anybody, if the need for our staff is to stay in the city, we would obviously stay in the city. We would not send anybody. We have the right to refuse to go for mutual aid, and we would certainly exercise that based on the size of the event that was going on in our city. Our city is number 1 to us, and we're always going to be protecting our citizens first and foremost. With that being said, if there's 2 identical requests, so if Gallatin was to ask for something and Shackle Island, or Shackle Island and number 1 was to ask, if they had 2 different incidents going on in 2 different areas of Sumner County, we would have the right to refuse to either go to either one of those or choose which one we were going to. We're not obligated to send anything to either one of them based on the chief officer's discretion of what size the emergency is and what the threat level is. Then we would make the decision to send whatever apparatus to the area that would need it the most.
And we can still maintain a high level of service within the city, even with these contracts in place, because you still have the option to not go.
Absolutely. So what we'll do, once you guys vote on these and decide to move forward with them, we will spell out to our staff what the expectations are. So 2:00 in the morning, if something happens, we have not talked about this yet, but originally I would suggest that we send an engine and a truck and a supervisor, and that'll still leave us a truck and 6 engine companies in the city. And then once they get out there and do a fair assessment with whoever's out there, if there's another need, they can ask for it, and that'll come through either myself or Chief Edwards, and then we'll notify these guys if we're going to send anything else outside the city. But that'll be based on the assessment. Once they get out there, connect to the officer in charge at Shackle Island, we fall under the instant command structure under unified command, and we'll make decisions based off what's going on at that location at that time.
Do you have any concerns with these agreements?
Absolutely not.
And are these, is the number 1 volunteer fire department and Shackle Island volunteer fire department, are these contracts identical?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
Let me add something to it. They're also identical to what number 1 signed a year and 2 months ago. With the change of the dates, that's it.
If just for a point of clarification, if I may, there are one differences in them, and that is what we're going to respond to automatically based on churches in those 2 locations. And that is the only difference in them. There's, let me get to that. In number 1's jurisdiction, there is, I think, 2 churches, Rehoboth Methodist Church and Rome Baptist, that we will respond to automatically based on the situation there. And then for Shackle Island, it is Beach and Hunter, but we've already entered into a different agreement with them, so that doesn't really matter. But St. John Baptist, Long Hollow Church, Beach Presbyterian, and Shackle Island Church of Christ. That is the only differences in the number of locations that we will respond to automatically. Other than that, these are identical.
Okay.
Let me ask this real quick. So we'll have this agreement with these are the only 2 volunteer fire departments that neighbor Hendersonville, right?
Correct.
So we'd have with them, but we don't have to have it with neighboring cities.
We don't, but what we're in the process of, we've had one in the past with Gallatin, which is automatic aid. So like on the east side of town for, say, Lakes of Savannah, Saundersville Road, because we have a Station 6 is the closest station there. And they have a Station 4, which is right off Station Camp. So we're in the process of meeting with them next week to bring something back to these 2 to automatically fill an aid there. So we're not sending everything to the far east side of town. We'll provide automatic aid to Gallatin on their end of town towards us, and they're going to help us on this east side of town if these guys agree to it and y'all agree to it when it comes before you. And then same thing for like 12 Stones with Goodlettsville. We want to sit down with them. That's a different monster because Metro's involved there, and Goodlettsville relies on Metro a lot, Metro Nashville Fire. And so there's a different monster to deal with Goodlettsville there, where the Gallatin and us want to rely on each other on this side of town.
Any other questions? Do you have a question? Go right ahead.
Sometimes when you go out for a fire, it requires multiple engines. What that does, it really robs a part of the city from responsive fire protection services. So is there a limit that we'll only send 1 truck or one unit and not rob 2 or 3 stations and leave the city naked, so to speak?
I think what I've seen in the past, and it doesn't mean that it can't be changed per discussion with them, is up to half of our resources could leave the city if they are notified and they agree to that.
Up to half?
Half, which would be basically 3 engines in one of our trucks.
That'd be a Long Hollow Church situation.
Correct. That would be a high threat with a high level of, depending on the size of the building, a commercial size building. I cannot make that judgment on my own. I have to get the assessment from whoever's in charge on the scene, and then I feed back to them, and they make that decision of whether we're allowed to do that. Obviously, I think that they would rely on what I'm telling them. We're not obligated to do that. We do not have to do that. If we send an engine in a truck and that's all we can afford to send, then that's all we can have. That's all we send. Again, our community is our number 1 priority. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So is there anything in this contract that would preclude the city from making a claim on the homeowner's fire insurance. Anything in here that prohibits it.
From my understanding, you could do that with the people here, right, in the city limits, if you wanted to. There's a clause in everybody's homeowner's insurance that you could, for fire services for a fire. I don't think there's anything that would preclude that. I will tell you, based on the conversation that was at the meeting last night at Shackle Island, they think that, again, per the CTAS group, is that that's the city trying to step through the door and create an annexation issue. That's not the truth. That's not even been discussed. I don't know where the annexation thing keeps popping up, because the city can't arbitrarily go out there and draw people in without the people wanting to be drawn in.
Okay, so there's nothing to preclude it. I would hope that if we do have a situation like that, that we would attempt to try to recoup some of our expenses.
Some of our surrounding jurisdictions, I'll just take Williamson County, for instance, Franklin, Williamson County. They have some agreements that they charge like a flat fee, $250 for an engine company to go outside the city. If that's 5 times a year, 6 times a year, whatever. I do know that Franklin and Williamson County have been in some negotiations about charging the county some money if Williamson County was to be needed Franklin City to come out to them. They have not reached an agreement on that.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we charge the county. That's a whole different ball.
Sure, absolutely.
I wouldn't dare do that. But since there is an insurance policy, I would like for us to try to recoup some of our expenses, Mayor, if we can. The last thing I would ask is the city of Hendersonville going to be the de facto fire protection service for the county in any of these volunteer stations, volunteer districts?
Well, the possibility is always for us to be there first. Yes, sir, because they are a volunteer department and they may not have anybody there. Does that mean that every time we're going to be the first ones there? Absolutely not. Does that mean that we may be the first ones there? Certainly, there's a possibility for that.
How does the 911 ping different agencies?
So it's based on territories, zones. So if a 911 comes in, they get the address. It pops up on the automatic CAD in front of the dispatcher, and they know if it's city or county, and they dispatch appropriately or accordingly based on that. So how it works currently right now through the ECC is if they dispatch Shackle Island, they don't get a response. They tone them out again in 90 seconds. I think it is something like that, 90 seconds. They get a response or don't get a response. Then they move to the next closest volunteer department.
How many minutes?
90 seconds. So a minute and a half.
Seconds.
Yes. Yes. So that's why we always talk about having a 4.5 minute response time. It's important that we give that level of service. They have 90 seconds to answer that. I think it's 90 seconds. If they don't answer it, then they go to the next closest volunteer department. However, if we enter in this interlocal agreement, I'll take the incident from Tuesday. They have to ask us, request for us, verbal through a radio dispatch that they want Hendersonville to respond to that.
The volunteer fire department.
Whoever's jurisdiction it is has to verbally ask for us.
So before we go, we're going to get a request from the volunteer.
That's how I read the law, the TCA. Yes, sir.
Okay.
If they don't request us, then we don't go,
With the exception of those automatics.
with the exception of the automatics.
Those buildings that are automatic, the churches and schools.
And what's the scope of our coverage? Is it just for fire? We're not doing medical calls.
No, sir. It's the call types for mutual aid or confirmed structure fires, vehicle entrapment accidents with entrapments, a drowning other than a swimming pool, like a pond or something like that we might have to send some of our dive team folks out, a swift water rescue, or a hazardous materials incident. Those are the only 5 types that we're going to respond to.
So medical calls that we respond like in the city, we will not be responding on a strict medical call. I'm glad that we're not. That's all, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I would like to make a motion that we approve or send both of these to BOMA with approval.
Do you want to send them with a positive recommendation?
With a positive
negative,
recommendation.
or
I was
no
trying to get to a positive recommendation.
I will second your motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay. Next, we are on other agenda items, and we have several items for discussion. that are on the mayor's list of important things for 2025. So I will let you start with that.
Okay. So a couple of them are better discussed from Chief Bush and Chief Jones. Why don't we get to those first?
Okay,
And that would probably, and I would say those three are fire department call volume from senior living facilities, fire reinspection after a failed inspection, and multiple leaf responses to same address. So probably C is probably the, and I've got material on other ones that I want to present, but
Okay.
I think probably the first one that I would recommend is fire department call volume from senior living facilities and healthcare facilities.
okay.
And that'd be Chief Bush.
Chief Bush.
So, I mean, obviously, the mayor reached out to me over a year ago and just wanted numbers of high residence or call types to local, either whether it's residents or businesses. And so I provided him that information. We do have a high incident of responding to some senior living facilities. We have kind of discussed, what should we do about that? I don't think we've ever really landed on a decision on what to do. And I think that's what he's wanting is just kind of some direction. I know in talking to other departments, they have some of the same issues with going to like a 419 East Main, which is a healthcare facility. And we respond there quite a bit. And there's certified nursing staff there. And it could be Miss Jones or Mr. Jones laying in the floor, and all they need is lift assist to get out of the floor and be put back in their bed or whatever with no injuries if there's no transport. There's no really jurisdictions around that charge because they go over a certain amount of calls. But I do know there's some conversations going on with other jurisdictions about charging for somebody that's a non-transport. So if we get called to that 419 and we go to just pick Miss Jones up out of the floor, then we turn around and bill that company for the lift assist, because really and truly they should have the coverage with nursing staff to do their own lifting. They're taught all that in nursing school. They're taught all that in the healthcare facilities, and they have other avenues to lift other than just using our forces and manpower to do that. That would be my recommendation. But again, we've not really sat down and landed on that. I think he's just kind of wanting the conversation to go somewhere and figure out what's the best thing to do.
We do have one house also that is a regular caller.
That has decreased because I think that lady is no longer there.
Okay.
We've not been to that place in quite some time.
And it was every other day for?
It was probably 2 and 3 times a day, like to get her to the car for a doctor's visit and then bring her from the car back to the house, inside the house after the doctor's visit.
Do you think if you levied a fee to the facility that it would reduce them calling when you needed to be called?
The compassionate side of me wants to be able to try to go talk to these folks and let them know that this is a possibility. I think an education piece to give them an opportunity to try to correct their problem before that happens would be crucial for us. Plus, it gives us an opportunity to talk to them a little bit about what we're going to do if we can't find some resolution to that. I do think that that's an option for us to do with everybody's permission. But again, you guys dictate what we do, and we're certainly going to abide by that.
I mean, I would hate for them to not call when they needed to call, because the staff is going to get in trouble if they have too many calls. And so we didn't send somebody because the staff didn't want to get written up.
Yeah, you don't want to get into those type situations for sure.
That's my concern with that.
And so, by the way, if y'all feel like we should just live with this and go for it, especially on this one, and that's just part of the service that we provide. Okay, I mean, I'm not really going to push it, but I feel like y'all at least need to know that we're in this situation with a couple of them.
I mean, maybe talk and see if you could work something out, but I don't want them not to call and then you have maybe that, I don't know.
Well, so to accurately define the problem would be my question. If this is one facility that has numerous calls, we can deal with one facility. But if all 10, how many there are facilities in Hendersonville, it's an issue. We need to establish criteria of how many calls is too many.
And I think that's what he asked before was the top 5, if I'm not mistaken. And I provided, and it was 4 healthcare facilities and 1 residence were the top 5 at that moment that he asked me.
And those 4 were all above 7. I think 70 something was the lowest for the year. Am I right about that?
I think that's correct. I'd have to go back and look.
So more than once a week. for
Well, and I
each
think,
of them.
yeah, so I think, I don't know, I think a fee is reasonable for something like that. And if it, particularly since it's a commercial building that has concentrated a large number of people in one spot to make money. And I don't want them using the fire department for their fall assist of help me get up. So I don't know, I would like to know, so we know it's 5 facility doing 70 calls a year?
At least.
At
Well, 4 of
least.
them. One of them was the resident that dropped off.
Could we go talk to those facilities and then monitor it for 6 months and see what happens?
We could do whatever. Again, I think an
But that-
education piece to let them understand what potentially is gonna happen if it doesn't slow down some. Because again, we're ready to help and do whatever we need to do. And I do think it's a slippery slope, but you also want to make sure that we're not just going, I mean, there's been some conversations with staff, when they go to these facilities that they're instructed not to pick people up. Well, I mean, I've worked in healthcare facilities my whole life as a paramedic before I got chief years ago. And when we had patients fall, we were certainly responsible for picking them up and getting them back to where they needed to be.
And if that's gonna be the response of the facilities, then maybe I would be more apt to.
I do think an opportunity to educate people to say, hey, what can we do to help cut this down? Is it a staffing issue that you guys are having that makes that problem for y'all? What can y'all do to improve that? And then also our call volume is going up. We may not be available to just come pick up Miss Jones. If we got a CPR in progress or another more critical call, you're keeping us from being able to respond to that while picking up Miss Jones that you guys ought to be able to do.
And these places are quite profitable.
If they're injured, they're injured, and we certainly want to be there to help them and transport them and do whatever. Absolutely.
That would be my recommendation, is educate them and then reevaluate it after we've done that. That's what I would
I think
like
that's
to see.
reasonable. I think that's reasonable.
How do you feel about that?
I think it's a good idea, and I would specifically ask the question what they think we should do for numerous calls to get their input to solve the problem, because it's not everybody abusing the system.
True. That's helpful.
So can you get back with us in 6-9 months?
Absolutely.
So next item I have on here for Chief Bush is, this used to be a bigger problem than it is now. We have some folks that need a fire inspection, and sometimes they call us assuming they're going to be ready when we show up, and they aren't always ready when we show up. They essentially use us as a guide on what to do and what they can get away with, what they think they can get away with. And it causes our staff to have to go out there a second and third time. It's not really fair to the people who do it right, and that make sure that they have a contractor who knows what they're doing. How much has this been lately?
I haven't really talked to prevention about that lately. I know in the previous years it was a problem. We'd have scheduled inspections to where we're testing alarm systems, sprinkler systems, and we'd get out there and they were not ready or they would fail. And then we'd have to turn around and reschedule it and take time and staff to come back out and do that. So when you're talking about large square footage facilities, it takes a couple of those guys to be there to manage that. And so lots of people get it right on the first time. And then there's a few that don't necessarily get it right the first time. And then we end up going the second and the third time, as the mayor said. And we're just kind of thinking that, we'd rather you do it right the first time. We understand there may be a knockoff one time every so often, but if we have to come a second and third time repeatedly, I think that's using resources and staff, and we should probably charge for that.
Can we not charge a permit fee, and this is the fee for our first visit, and then if you come a second visit, your fee goes up $100?
Sort of, but the permit fee, they're paying that through codes, right? Okay, so in codes is putting all the inspections together and charging that fee.
Can we not separate it?
So what I think maybe we do is maybe we have a schedule on there. Your second inspection for mechanical or electrical or fire costs this. Your third one costs this. If that's the direction you want us to go, I mean, it's something. Would this be administrative or does this need to go to the board?
No, I think it'd be administrative.
Okay. If y'all feel strongly about that, I think that's something we can do. But it's a problem that we haven't talked about that I felt like I should tell you about.
I mean, I think if they're just getting you to come out and look the first time, that's gonna abusing your resources.
The first time, again, we get scheduled, they're no to go out there, but then when they get out there, they fail or they're not ready. And then they say, oh, well, wait a minute, can you come back in 2 weeks? Well, that's not always convenient. And, they want us when they want us, right? They want us to be there tomorrow to get open. But a lot of times they fail the inspections. And we would rather them focus on getting it right the first time and call us out and us all be squared away after the first time.
Let's say a separate fee for your second visit.
Any other thoughts?
Currently, how do electrical inspections go? If I remember right, at the time I was pulling electrical permits, we always did it right. I never had a second inspection, so I don't know what to do with the second inspection, whether they charge for it or not. But I've seen in Metro or other jurisdictions that we worked in when I had a business that, to see a second inspection fee wasn't uncommon, I didn't think. But I will back up a little bit. I only one time got red tagged in the 40 years we were in business, and it wasn't my fault. So my lawnmower hit the junction box. But I can't speak very well to second inspections. I've never had one. So I don't think it's a problem with the idea of the people that are abusing the system. But what would the inspection fee be? What is it now? Or is there a set number?
Yeah, so typically your first and second inspections, there's sometimes honest mistakes are made and someone left something off and, you have to come back a second time. Third time is not really common. So I have set up fee schedules before where you're allowed a second inspection, and at your third one, there's a separate cost to it. And it's usually some factor of how long it takes the employee. I mean, usually it's a set price. So what does an average inspection, take in terms of time? What's that employee's cost? And then you charge that. It's a fee, right? You're not supposed to make profit on it. It's just cost recovery. So you figure out a cost recovery rate, and then you charge that for like a third inspection.
Well, I think you pay for your education. If I make a mistake and I pay for a second fee, I would remember it better.
We can do that. Okay. Appreciate that help. Okay.
That's how I feel. And that helps the person who hired the people, get them to do it right the first time.
Yeah, we have multiple inspections that we go out and do this. So maybe that we want to provide some consistency across how we do all of our inspections, because if we do it differently, like just say for, electrical or just for fire, then every other type of permit, that's something that we have to track and create some inconsistency with how we manage the inspections that we do.
Well, and again, I go back to on this, how big is the problem? Because if we're going to charge a fee for the second inspection, are we looking at really as income producing or training the contractors to do it right? Because for the number of inspections we have, second inspections we have, how much money would that generate in a year? And I'm thinking it wouldn't be that much. I'm thinking there's not that many second inspections, but I don't know.
I can gather some of that data from fire prevention if you want me to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing we'd want to make sure is, so we assess our fees on cost recovery. So if we assumed a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% reinspection on the fee originally, then some of that already may be built into the original inspection fee, where we know that sometimes we're going to go back out a second time. Because generally we'll aggregate data to say, hey, how much time have we spent on this activity? How many inspections did we have? And then we'll kind of just average it out to determine the fee in the first place. So we can go back and look and kind of see what that fee is and
See what the numbers are.
Mhm.
You want to go back a couple years, 3 years?
Yeah, the last time we did the fee update, we'll see what calculations were put in there for our time. And we can do an evaluation on, what the average time is to go out to do an inspection and do some analysis and then bring that back to this committee.
That sounds good.
You want me to ask like 2 or 3 years worth of how many times we've gone out, second time, third time? You want those numbers as well?
Sure.
Okay.
And is it commercial? Is it residential?
I can speak to that. It's mostly commercial. Usually residential folks get it right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Good. The next one,
I'd like to deal with item F. So this
Okay.
is similar to item C, but with the police department. If we have a meth house in Hendersonville and it's cleaned up, the bill can be sent. Hendersonville City would not clean up, but the bill can be sent to the property owner. We have court costs to recover the costs the city has for people who violate our local laws. But we have some properties that are frequent flyers, and most of these are commercial properties, and we don't have any way to really discourage the continuous phone calls or to recover that cost. What we don't want to do is something was brought up earlier. We don't want to discourage somebody from calling in a legitimate emergency where they need police help. But we also want the property owners to take responsibility for their tenants. And in some cases, that's not happening. So I'm going to ask Chief Jones to talk about this.
So we looked at overall, the majority of our top 20 call counts are all commercial. But they run the gamut from 911 call to shoplifting to you name it. I mean, and so for the commercial side, I know that some of our top addresses would be like 204 North Anderson, which is Walmart, and we get a lot of shoplifting reports from them. They're calling in, they're either in progress or just left, that sort of thing. So we get a lot of those.
But you don't want to discourage them from calling.
We don't want to
in.
discourage that.
We don't. And then 300 Indian Lake Boulevard is obviously the streets of Indian Lake. We get, and that's not broken down by the individual businesses up there, but we get a lot of those calls. And then the same way when we're looking at the other side, a lot of our call counts are for our apartment complexes. But the reason for that is the number of residences there. So it's not all focused on one apartment. It's just that address. So if we're looking at our top 20, we're talking about Monhaven, 1070 West Main, 350 Old Shackle, 1080 West Main, the Aventura there on Indian Lake, 231 New Shackle. I mean, when we're looking at it, that's our apartment complexes. But tracking it to an individual apartment, we haven't narrowed it down that much. We just know that those apartment complexes, we're getting those calls. Residential, oddly enough, the top two on the list are the short-term rentals, which I ran this report in December, and then I ran it again the other day for current. And that was the top two have swapped actually. So, but they're very close to each other in call count numbers. So, one of them that kind of stood out to me was, it was an address out on Saundersville Road, but it's an intersection, and our officers have been doing some pretty heavy patrols out there based on one of the other categories on the list for discussion. So, and then we'll see some that we get a lot of calls at. I looked up a couple of those today, and what we were seeing is, and we know what the issue is. Sometimes it's we're dealing with somebody that's having some mental issues maybe, and so we'll get a large number of 911 calls or just other response calls in general. And sometimes it's they'll call it in a suspicious person or a suspicious incident, and of course to them it's real, but we get out there and obviously it's not true. But we do have, there's a couple of addresses on here that I'm familiar with, and it's based on the incidents going on there. There's one in particular, I'm not sure that it's if it's a rental or an actual residence, but we made frequent trips there. So
Now, you did hit the nail on the head, is that we don't want to discourage them from shoplifting legitimate calls. And we do have a couple businesses that I have heard that are reluctant to make those calls. We have a business looking to move from Davidson County to here that I understand is reluctant to make those calls. We don't want to become a haven for businesses that don't want to prosecute shoplifting. But at the same time, I have a hard time with some of those apartment complexes that we're out there all the time. And they need to do a better job. They need to be more responsible.
I think the apartment complexes and renters, we could go contact the homeowner that it's becoming a nuisance.
If we know how to get hold of them.
For rental residences, we have actually gone down that road a couple of times to encourage them that they need to be more selective in their renting, or set out some terms for them to what they need to deal with. But that, enforcing that is difficult. Now, if we get multiple, and some of these, and we kind of try to judge, if it's multiple 911 calls, we can charge them with misuse of the 911 system. But sometimes if we find that it's someone that's either having some mental problems or elderly, we choose not to do that. But if we find out it's an issue with abuse of the 911 system, we have absolutely charged folks in the past for that. And that's a citable offense. It's not a financial charge, but it is citable.
Can we monitor that for 6 months?
Sure.
Well, and be more specifically, I mean, we've been monitoring it, but, so the problem seems to be apartment complexes. The question would be which unit, right?
Well, and what I looked at with the apartment complexes, we just know that some of them have a higher call volume than others.
Yeah.
But it's spread out, I mean, and some of them, very obviously, they're legitimate calls. They're domestics, or they're, they're attempted vehicle burglaries, or maybe an actual vehicle burglary. And we find that our apartment complexes have a higher incidence of vehicle burglaries because there's so many vehicles concentrated in one spot, as opposed to the residential areas where, obviously they're more spread out. It's not to say we don't have any in residential areas, but if they're going to hit one, and that's why our officers concentrate a lot of time in there. And a lot of these calls are self-initiated on the part of the officer. So because they spot something out of place, and they self-generate a call.
So let me ask this. If we were to ask apartment complexes to help us solve this problem, what could an apartment complex do? I mean, even if they hired a security guard, would that change anything?
So some of the apartment complexes in town do give a discounted rate, and it may be to a Sumner County deputy or a Hendersonville officer that's living there but they ask them in return for that to make, walkthroughs of the area. And sometimes it helps, sometimes it does not, because sometimes it comes down to how willing are the apartment complexes. So if we have repeat offenders, I can tell you 15 years ago, apartment complexes were much quicker to provide somebody an eviction notice. If they were generating frequent calls to the police just through their activity, they were much quicker to say, okay, we've had enough of that. Here's an eviction notice. That's much less likely to occur nowadays than it was 15 or 20 years ago. And I'm not sure what the change is. I think some of that was the apartment complexes previously had resident managers. So the apartment managers lived in the complex. They didn't want to have to put up with that either. They didn't want that in a place where they lived. Whereas now what you see is management companies that may not even be based in the state of Tennessee anymore that run these apartment complexes.
Yeah, and that's why I was wondering what they would actually do or could do in addition to that. But so it's something we can look at. I don't know if there's an easy solution.
Oh, there definitely is not.
And we've tried engaging with them. It's interesting. So some of our businesses, we know a lot of times when there is a change in loss prevention personnel, because when they have really good LP personnel, the call count is going to be higher. We just know that. If they don't have really good LP personnel, the call count drops off.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that the shoplifting's not happening. It just means they're not
looking at
as
it.
a team.
They're not seeing it.
And I will give credit to, businesses, some of the businesses that, excuse me, Glenbrook, Walmart, they are very happy to assist and go forward with prosecution. We've had some heart-to-heart conversations with some of the businesses that want to call after the fact, but don't want to, they just want an officer to come take a report, but they don't want to assist with prosecution.
Mhm.
And so we've convinced some of them that it was definitely in their best interest to assist with prosecution. And we have had instances where they didn't want to. We followed through on the case, made an arrest, and we just dropped subpoenas on them, and they had to come to court at that point.
Mhm.
We could set up satellite offices at all the
Apartment
high crime locations.
No.
Well, and we keep officers frequently in the streets of Indian Lake and places that we know of. We have teams of officers that will focus on Walmart, Lowe's, Glenbrook, streets of Indian Lake, and their goal is to cut down on the shoplifting, to stop that from happening in Hendersonville. And we feel like to some degree that has been effective, but partnering up with the businesses where they're very attuned to being involved in the process, going through with prosecution, that's helped. We think that's helped, but it just doesn't put a stop to it.
There's not an easy solution.
Because you don't want them not to call.
Right.
Okay, we'll think on that one.
Okay.
What's your next?
So I'd like to talk about homelessness, item number A. Let me pass these up here. There's 10 copies of here. So we've had some homeless people in Hendersonville, no doubt about that. About a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, found one. If you look at the picture on the second page, there are 2 homeless camps. There are 2 tents in that area. This is behind Walmart, other side of the railroad tracks. It was essentially a home. It's hard to say this person was homeless. They had 2 big canopies. They had a bed, shelving, probably 20 tubs of clothing and books and possessions. And we fortunately found out about this. We've had a handful here and there of other people that have set up camps. Obviously, we don't want to get to where one of our neighboring counties is. Supreme Court recently said that if your business is negatively impacted by homeless people, you can expect to be you have an expectation to be compensated by the municipality. Obviously, we don't want to go there. However, it just emphasizes the responsibility the city has. Really, the way that mostly we address homelessness is if there is a trespassing violation. But that depends on the property owner. And in this situation, we were fortunate. The property owner was helpful. We need the property owner to give us permission to do that. If they choose not to, or you can't get a hold of that person, then we have to start looking at zoning violations. And what I'm talking about is that if you live in a house that is not zoned as a campground, if you have a grocery store that's not zoned as a campground. And so we have to look at that. That's a little bit harder to deal with. It's much easier if you can get the property owner to agree that is trespassing. That's only in the situation when we have a camp. If we have people asking for money from people walking by on a sidewalk, a little bit harder. There's some First Amendment issues there. From people pulling out at an intersection, a little bit harder there as well. People pushing grocery carts. We've had this twice in the past 6 months. People pushing grocery carts, one through our park, one down Gallatin Road. There's not much illegal going on with that. They probably stole that grocery cart. But if the retailer doesn't want to deal with it, they may just decide to chop it up to one less grocery cart. And there's not much we can do with that. There are a couple cities that have addressed that outside of Tennessee, that being in possession of a grocery cart that is not yours or pushing a grocery cart on right away is prohibited. That's one way. If people are pushing a grocery cart in Hendersonville, they are probably camped somewhere in Hendersonville. That's pretty simple. This has become and is becoming a greater problem for the ring counties around Davidson County. We never want to get in a situation where we have an encampment, and closing encampments is very, very difficult, because really what you're doing is you're telling them you can't be on this piece of land. And they go out to the next piece of land or the next piece of land. We don't want to be a haven for homeless people. I'm not saying that homeless people commit crimes, but where there are homeless encampments, it is a crime magnet. And it may not be them committing the crime, but it invites crime. So, Chief Jones, you want to talk a little bit about how we deal with this?
So, as the mayor said, somebody walking down the road or pushing a grocery cart right now, there's not a lot we can do about that. However, we do, if we find, so we do have a current city ordinance that camping overnight in the city of Hendersonville is prohibited. So we've used that statute. Obviously our parks close at 11 p.m. So we have officers that will look for that and run people out of the parks because they're not allowed to be in the park after 11 p.m. for any reason. So camping is absolutely prohibited. And we've used that in several instances in the parks. One of the issues we've run into is, so the linear park is not actually city property. However, even though it's not city property, you're still not allowed to camp. So when they find them, they'll tell them you've got to move on. You cannot stay in the city overnight. And they recommend, there's shelters in Nashville. Some of them don't want to make use of that, but that's what we recommend to them, is that they seek assistance from the homeless shelters in Nashville. And so the biggest thing we can do, our two biggest ways to combat that at this point, is the trespassing statute and or the camping prohibition in the city of Hendersonville.
Are there any ordinances or anything that we could do to help that?
I think so, like the mayor said, and very correctly, we've identified a shopping cart from the store, and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. They're not interested in, and it's not, it's they're not interested in following up on that, so it makes it difficult for us to do anything. One of the issues with the panhandling that we've had, we've dealt with is we've looked at it from the standpoint of traffic, that you can't impede the flow of traffic. So, you can't be out in the road collecting donations because that creates a public safety hazard. So we've tried to we've tried to be creative in ways that we look to stop some of that. But sometimes it's an issue just finding those folks, and a couple of times we've had reports where people thought there may be people camping or staying. And one of them actually involved the Corps of Engineers property. Well, the Corps is very much interested in prohibiting that. So between us and the Corps of Engineers, we checked a pretty large area and found no evidence of that. So I'm not sure where that information had come from, but we do know there's some folks that are staying in the city, and we may not be exactly sure where they're staying at. So sometimes it's just a matter of finding them so that we can get them to move on. As far as an ordinance, I don't have anything off the top of my head that would help with that. I mean, it's a problem that a lot of cities are facing. I think, as the mayor mentioned, we do not want large homeless encampments because it creates lots of problems. And some of them are just from a public health standard, that's going to be an issue. So we do have folks call in sometimes to let us know about that. Our officers will absolutely check on people sleeping in a car. Just to make sure they're okay. But I mean, we have, again, at the point, if they're in a parking lot sleeping in a car, that could be considered camping. And so that's kind of how we approach that at this point.
Chief Bush mentioned something I didn't think about, but when you've got, when you start in the camp, when you start talking about 2, 3, or 4 or more, they're going to get more calls.
Can we, so in Hendersonville, because we talked earlier about Hendersonville's not growing land-wise, how did we discover the two this here?
It's a guy with a drone. He had gotten a drone for a gift, took it out and flew it. And thought, so I don't know if you can see both of them. One is blue and one is brown.
Yeah.
They're probably 30 yards apart from each other. And we found him, and he emailed me a video, and it had probably been there. It had to be multiple weeks.
Is that Walmart property, I assume?
It was.
It was.
Well, hold on. Let me think. It's behind Walmart.
But it's before,
Do you remember
Calendar
this, Chief
Lane,
Jones?
isn't it?
Trace went out and helped with it. I know that.
He did, and our officers were out there.
Was it the Indian Lake Business Owners Association?
That may be what it was. It may be Indian Lake Business Owners Association owns that stretch
Yeah.
of property, but I can't, because there's been some changing on who owns what out there. So I think that may have been who it was. I don't remember exactly, but I know they weren't happy about it
Yeah,
either.
and we have it
we
was
discovered
because
it by accident.
yeah, it was. And it was. I remember this. Henry Puckett. He's the manager for that. Fortunately, he's local, and we know him, and so we were able to get out there.
He was very helpful when we were having the issue, because we talked to him about the issues with the linear park.
Okay.
And yeah, and so he was very helpful with that.
We had another one not too long ago behind Cash Saver, down the hill a little bit in some woods.
okay. So let me ask this question. Could we identify parcels of land? Well, how much land is there that they could come in here and camp on and watch those areas? But I think we do need to pass an ordinance that we're not allowing encampments. Just so we have something in place to prevent it. If we need to strengthen that later, do it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, how many places can I go camp in Hendersonville and not be seen for a week?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Really?
So our officers, we've made it a point to make sure our officers are very aware to keep, because we had heard from some citizens to keep checking the parks. And especially some of the more out of the way areas in the parks, whether it's Saunders Ferry or Drake's Creek, or, because there are areas where you
They're
probably
tucked
could
away.
be without being seen or being noticed. And so we've asked them to increase their checks on those areas just to make sure, that that's not occurring. I mean, there's the section over by Saundersville Road, behind, it'd be behind like Five Guys in that area over there where the walking trails are, and some of those areas over there. We're still a little wooded,
Yeah.
but it's not developed. And so, asking them to keep an extra eye on that. And some of that comes in from citizens too.
I forgot about the Arboretum by Walton Ferry. We had evidence over there 3-4 years ago. Back along the lake.
So could we do an ordinance for that?
To ban encampments, I can talk to Lance and see what that looks like. What we do is we look and see what other cities have done that seems to have worked. So by the way, we have a wonderful resource now, is that now that our ordinances are on a platform that's online, we can search every other city's ordinances in its index to see what they have passed. And you see down here on you see 4 links right there. That's how we got those. We did a search there, and we got about shopping carts.
Which when you mentioned that, the one thing I think about is and I don't know his name, the guy that walks around Hendersonville with the sign from Rivergate to Hendersonville up and down New Shackle Island Road.
And he's not homeless.
Well, I'd heard that. Everything I'd heard has just been from other people, but I've never met the guy. But
Lives down New Shackle.
he sometimes pulls a cart that's not a grocery cart, but you could put groceries in it. And I guess that turns into interpretation, right?
Probably have to define that somehow.
So, okay.
Well, and so the other issue with that is there's some folks that, they pull a little, it's not an actual grocery cart or like a Walmart cart, but we have some people that do walk to and from the stores, and they're
carry
literally
those.
taking their groceries home in one of those carts. And our officers are not going to be stopping those folks just because they choose to be a pedestrian instead of motorized. But,
Yeah.
When you see somebody pushing a
Walmart
shopping
cart.
cart that's filled to overflowing, and it's not, I just went to Walmart,
Mhm.
you pretty well know what's going on. So I think it's fairly easy for our officers to make that distinction. And be, again, it comes into using some common sense when
Yeah.
you're doing that. So
We can look into that with Lance.
Question. You said Tennessee has restrictions against overnight parking at rest stops. What would it, how difficult would it be to ask the state to add to rest stops, public parks, and make it state law?
It would be difficult at all to ask.
Right now, what do we do, Chief, if someone's parking in our parks overnight?
well, so the parks are posted that they close at 11 p.m. And so if you're in a car in the park, or if you're in the park period after 11 p.m., we're going to run you out because that's trespassing in the city park.
Okay.
The only exceptions to that, and we've dealt with this before, is the boat ramps and like Saunders Ferry Park, so like Rockland Park closes also. However, by statute, you're allowed to be in the park to access fishing or launching a boat. So if we have somebody that's fishing, sitting on the bank fishing at 2:00 in the morning, they're fine. You can't be in your car sleeping at 2:00 in the morning, claim you're waiting to go fishing, because that's not going to work.
So we have sufficient authority to keep people from parking in the parks all night and sleeping.
Yes, sir.
We have sufficient authority for that.
We do.
Do we have sufficient authority now, I would think that pushing a buggy, a cart down a right of way could cause traffic problems, could cause accidents.
It could, but usually what we'll find is they're pushing them on the sidewalk. They're not out in the roadway. And I was going to add too, we are under contract with the Corps of Engineers. So anything we do on Corps property, they're going to back us because they contract with us to do that, with the city to do that. And so we're very familiar with their rules and regulations too, and what they allow and don't allow. And they pretty much, and we've actually asked for some rule changes from them, and they were very quick to grant that because we wanted them to more closely align with what the city ordinances already were, so that it's kind of uniform.
So
And
what ordinance or statute did you exercise in getting these people off this property?
Two different ones: trespassing and camping in the city limits of Hendersonville.
Did the property owner have to file charges on trespassing, or can you do it without the owner's authority?
I don't remember the specific one. We have a trespass waiver form, which basically the property owner, and that's the one the mayor was talking about with Mr. Puckett. We had him sign one for the linear park. So what it basically says is if you're in violation, the officer can charge you with trespassing. So we will do that. And I don't remember on that one specifically which one we used, or if we used both of them. But
I mean, I'm willing as one alderman to give you the tools that
Absolutely.
you need to address this, but y'all have to come to us.
Absolutely.
Y'all are the experts.
we get pretty creative sometimes. So
Okay.
I think we use, like I said, we got the property owner involved, and they were agreeable that we use trespassing, and I think we use the overnight camping ordinance to dismantle that
Okay,
particular location.
thank you, Terry.
You are welcome. And he wanted to go to vape shops next, but who's gonna take that? Chief Jones?
I can talk about it. I'm not sure what, I was hoping the mayor'd still be here, because I'm not sure what the issue was with that. So we do have several vape shops in town. When we do alcohol buy stings and tobacco sales stings for businesses here in town. And I know that they have been checked frequently for underage sales of tobacco or vape products.
Have you issued any citations for that? Do you know?
We have, and I couldn't tell you which ones it was. Some of the vape shops sell tobacco, vape products, and alcohol, so they may get hit on all three. But some of the vape shops only sell vaping products or tobacco products. So that would only, and the mayor's back and all that.
Mhm.
We're on the vape.
Okay, super. So let me hand this out to you. The General Assembly has an organization that they put together, and it's called the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernment Relations. You might have heard me talk about TASR reports every once in a while, and it's to look at problems and try to come up with the recommended solutions. They looked at vaping in Tennessee, seeing that it is a significant problem in Tennessee, and that Tennessee is ranking among the top as far as the number of minors that are vaping and the destructive impact it's having. So different states have tried different approaches. The whole idea of vaping started out as this is an alternative to smoking cigarettes, therefore it's healthier. That is sort of true when it started. But when it got to the flavored vaping, it really started encouraging more people to do this than the number of people who have actually smoked. And the flavor vaping is definitely more appealing to kids. So the TASR report has some recommendations for the state to take, but they also mentioned a couple things that cities can do. And if you look on the page, let's see, I don't have these numbers, the third page, you see some possible solutions, and it mentions what Goodlettsville has done. Currently, vaping products, they're not really regulated as vape products, and the state is looking at changing that. But very similar to what we do with liquor stores, we could do with vape products. And keep in mind that a grocery store could sell vape products. You don't really have to be a vape store like you're a liquor store. So we could have a restriction for how many or how close all the vape sellers are to each other, as well as how close the vape seller is to a school. We don't really have that right now. We could restrict them to certain zones. Right now, they're in pretty much general commercial, a lot of commercial, and industrial. We could restrict them to just industrial or just a specific commercial. And that would reduce the number that we have. Goodlettsville's ordinance is in here. Keith Free is working on seeing how this ordinance could be adjusted to fit our zoning ordinances. And I think it's something worth pursuing. And if you look at some of the TASR report bullet points, it tells me that it's time that cities pay attention to this.
So do you recommend that we wait for Keith to get back with us and then draft some ordinances?
Yes, but I also would like some direction of how do you want to restrict them if you do want to restrict them? Do you want to restrict them that they have to be 1,000 feet from each other? Do you want to restrict them to have to be 1,000 feet from each other and 1,000 feet from a school? Or do you want to restrict that as well as they have to be industrial, or the number of them?
And if we restrict them by the number that are allowed within the city, what do you do with, it seems like there's a vape shop on every corner. Are they grandfathered?
They would be
in?
grandfathered until we get down to the maximum number that we actually allow.
And even if we change the zoning at this point, they're still grandfathered in.
They would.
So.
But it would have a big impact for the ones coming.
I definitely think.
And I did explain that we included, while you were out, that we include those when we
I
do
like that.
alcohol stings and we do the stings related to sales of tobacco and vapor products to underage persons.
I like that.
And so when they do those things, we have a list that we provide to the city recorder, both with alcohol and tobacco, of who sold, who refused to sell, follow the law, who sold, who was cited. And of course, if they're cited, not only do they have to go into general sessions court, but the holder of the beer license has to appear before the beer board for the city of Hendersonville. There's not a specific license or regulation for the sales of tobacco and vape products.
I would like to get an ordinance, maybe to restrict them and see if we could even increase our sting up, or the underage now to just try and scare these people that,
Okay.
you know, we're coming a lot more often right now.
So
'Cause
one
it
thing-
is a big problem.
One of the things this report encourages the state to do is to make it mandatory to ask for ID for people, for a person buying a vape product. It's mandatory for, I'm pretty sure, for alcohol and beer, but it's not mandatory. If somebody walks in and the person at the cash register thinks they look like 40, okay. But that's why this is happening much more, because it's not mandatory check for all IDs.
I'm surprised they haven't done that because it's mandatory for tobacco products.
Yeah.
So you would think that it would be for
So
vape
I
products.
personally would like to see us draft using the maximum authority we have from the state.
Okay.
To prevent the growth and to regulate the grandfather. So whatever is the maximum
Okay.
authority that we would have, and what about flavored vapes? That's what's real.
Yeah.
First of all, I think Robert Kennedy Jr. may take care of this at the federal level, but if he's confirmed. But does the state allow flavored vapes
So
for children?
Tennessee is very similar to a lot of other states, is that they find a product that should be banned and they take action against it. And then China puts it under a different manufacturer name and puts it under a different product name, and the state can't keep up. There's a couple states, you'll see this in the bullet points, there's a couple states that say, okay, they're all banned except for the ones that are on this list. That's the way Louisiana does it. And they are much more successful. That if you have an item that you want to sell as a vape product, you have to get it approved before it's available for sale.
And to answer your question, all vape products, irregardless of flavor, non-flavored, they are all illegal to sell to minors.
Well, I know,
Period.
but the enticement's there if you flavor them. So I wouldn't be opposed, you know, depending on what Lance said, of us asking our legislative delegation to strengthen vaping laws in the state as well. So do an ordinance, exercising maximum authority that the state gives us, and continue to sting operations, as the chairman said.
Okay.
And then also consider with our lobbyists of filing a bill or working with, is it TML?
TML hasn't really taken a stand on this, but there's another organization. Oh, it's the Heart and Lung folks. There's a coalition of heart and lung organizations that are involved with this.
People that came a year ago
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
would probably help us
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
My mind's gonna blank of his name and her name. But yes,
Okay.
I'm in agreement with as strict as we can be. Okay, street parking,
That's a whole meeting.
okay,
That's
we'll
a whole
skip it.
Yeah.
Do you wanna do feeding wildlife?
Sure. That's so. I think some of y'all may know that we had a resident recently that had hundreds of cats that the resident was feeding. It was a problem for the neighbors. It was a problem for nearby property owners. And she had so many citations that Chief Edwards had to schedule a special session.
You mean Judge Edwards?
Judge Edwards, yeah. So we have cats. We also have some people that feed skunks, obviously feed deer, and it's attractive to wild animals. Sometimes they're trying to feed a squirrel, but in reality, they're feeding deer and they're feeding skunks and they're feeding raccoons. And especially in the situation with the cats, it's become a problem. One thing that Judge Edwards says is it's hard to tell people they can feed a squirrel, but they can't feed a deer. And I remember asking somebody one time, well, do you feed the deer? And her answer was not intentionally. So one of the things that Russ suggested, and I haven't really looked into this a whole heck of a lot, that what he thinks would be a good idea is if you have food outside, it must be contained. Either you have a fence around your patio or you have a fence around your yard. And if you are offering food outside and you don't have a fence around there, that you're in violation.
You want my opinion?
That's why I came here.
I totally disagree.
Okay.
And here's my reason.
Okay.
One, I think it's way government overreach, but
Okay.
two, I have a lot of bird feeders. I enjoy feeding the birds.
Okay.
the bird's not the seed on the ground, I'll get a skunk every now and then. So
Okay.
you're gonna tell me you're gonna come find me, we're gonna have a problem.
What do you want me to do with this?
I mean, that's my, people
That's
feed
fine.
birds, you're gonna get animals. We live in this city with lots of animals.
I see it as an individual problem and should be
Okay.
handled on an individual basis. And I mean, because I'm thinking if I'm gonna start feeding the deer and they're coming to my backyard, I know who's gonna complain first. I mean, I know which neighbor's gonna complain first. It'll eventually be all of them if I'm feeding animals. But it's, yeah, and it can be, then I can meet Chief Jones and get to know him a little bit better.
So we did have a lady she was dumping 25 pounds of shelled corn on the ground, and she said it was just for the squirrels. And so we explained to her that appeared very much to be feeding deer, which is illegal in the city. And she was very nice and agreed that she would not do that anymore. So,
Yes.
and so it's, the problem we have, I can tell you too, is the potential for not geese so much, although they cause their own problems, but for skunks, raccoons, and other animals to be carrying rabies.
Yeah.
And that's an issue. And so, we've tried to do a lot through education just with the deer, but that extends to feeding other wild animals. Cause a lot of the people that their reason for doing it is their love of wildlife.
Yeah.
Well, but what, we've explained to them is you're actually doing more harm to these wild animals, because what happens is that they become dependent on that person as a food source, and they lose the ability to forage for food as they were intended to do. Then what happens is if that food source is cut off, then that animal can't survive. And so that's, and literally the education part of what we've done, we've tried to focus, even with the deer herd, is to focus more on education than actual citation. We've had to cite some folks because they just refused, but some of them just didn't really realize the problem they were causing. And so with the education piece, they kind of scaled back on that. But
And I think that would be probably the majority of the cases. They don't know they're causing a problem. They think they're feeding the squirrels, what they think.
The deer feeders, we have several folks who just keep doing it.
Mhm.
And their neighbors call me constantly.
we send our animal control
I'm gonna give them your phone
officers.
number. Doesn't sound like y'all want me to make any proposals on this.
I don't, I think it's,
No,
Okay.
all right,
Street parking is pretty involved. I mean, it's a long
we'll do
discussion.
a special one on that.
Probably so.
All right,
Probably so.
would you like to make a motion?
motion to adjourn.
I'll second, all in favor?
All right.
Thank y'all. Thank you.
Okay.